Hello and welcome back. Next I'm going to begin moving into focusing on some of the different areas of my sculpture, specifically the hair, the clothing. And I'm hoping that some of the techniques I'm going to show you in this video will help you not just address those areas, but overall give you greater confidence in adding some kind of push and pull around the surface of your sculpture so that you can create a little more added depth, a little more visual interest, instead of just having the entire surface of your sculpture lay completely flat and maybe having areas separated only with a very simple line. So we're going to really begin to build out some of the areas that you've seen in my sketch that might have a different texture or might just come out a little bit further beyond either the face or other parts of the body. So what I'm going to start with doing is I'm just going to roll a very thin little slab to attach to my head to create a little more volume for my hair. So I'm going to set her aside just for now. And I have a little ball of my plastic clay to go. I'm going to just start, like I showed you in my slip video the other day, by turning it and pinching it flat. So unlike a pinch pot, I'm not worried about keeping any specific form. I just want to keep it nice and level, but try to maintain that even thickness throughout. So kind of starting in the middle, rotating it, and working out towards the edges. Okay, and you can see that's getting a little larger as I go. I'm going to start back in the middle, kind of pinch it a little bit thinner, make those pinches close together so that you maintain that nice even thickness throughout. So my goal here is to make this slab close to about 1/8 of an inch thickness. Okay, so it's curving up a little bit, so I can kind of flip it over and flatten it out a little bit more using all 4 of my fingers pushed up against my thumbs on the other side. And you might not get it perfectly even doing this. If you don't have anything to roll it with, so say you didn't have a rolling pin to add to your toolkit, or something like a dowel rod, or maybe a wooden spoon handle, just to help you kind of thin and stretch that clay out. You can certainly do that if you have those items, but if you don't, just continue to pinch until you get to close enough to the thickness that you want for your particular slab, and then just drop it on the surface, flip it over, drop it again. You can even kind of drop it at an angle, sort of pull that clay towards yourself, and that'll begin to stretch it out a little bit in case you didn't feel comfortable pinching it so thin. Okay, so just be careful when you're pinching it not to pinch too much on the edges, because you want that to be even all the way through. You don't want to pinch these paper thin, because otherwise you might not be able to use that portion of the slab for what you intend to use it for. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use my rib tool here to smooth out that surface, give it a nice compression, make sure that clay gets pulled tightly together, not just on one, but both sides. And if you notice any little air bubbles, not a problem. Take your toothpick, skewer, whatever it may be, even a little pin, thumbtack, something pointed to push in there and open up those air bubbles, and then go back over it and smooth it out. Okay, actually I think this is a little thick for what I want, so I'm going to roll it out a little bit more. Again, if you have something rounded that you are able to use as a rolling pin to stretch that clay out, great, go ahead and use it. But if you don't, like I just showed you, there are other ways to get to that point. Okay. Just smoothing it out one more time. And I've got my slab ready to go. Okay, so next I'm going to just set this slab aside for now and come back to my figure. And I drew the lines for where the hairline is going to end up being on the, at least on the front of the head, so where it kind of comes up above the forehead. I'm going to continue that line just down and around so that I have a better sense of where that slab, when I go to attach it, is going to end. I don't want to cover up everything completely, so I just want to know where I'm ending that connection. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a scoring tool, and I'm just going to score in that area where that hair is going to be attached. So now that I've scored over the head, specifically in the area where I want that clay to be attached, being careful not to go past the hairline that I've drawn, I'm going to take my slab, and I think that I'm just going to cut generally out a little shape right here from my slab that mimics this kind of curve over where the hair sort of drapes down in front of the forehead and then over to the other side. So my part is a bit off-centered. So I'm just going to cut into the clay. I'm going to use a little toothpick. No need to bust out the butter knife for this. And I'm just going to come up, make a little point, and then come back down. So at least I have a starting point for where that hair is going to go, so that when I start to drape this slab over, I can at least line up my hairline as a starting point. Okay, so I'm just going to score gently over my slab here. No need to really rough it up because the clay is really soft. It'll grab on pretty easily once I start applying some pressure to it. Okay, so I have that scored up. You can see it in this light. And then I'm going to dab a little bit of slip, being careful not to get that sticky slip anywhere other than inside those lines that I've drawn and scored inside. So I want this piece of clay to just adhere to that area that I'm prepping. Now, there are lots of different ways that you guys can go about adding pieces of clay. Doing it this method is not necessarily the end-all be-all in terms of, you know, doing hair or adding any other parts of your figure. I'm just showing you one way, okay? If you figure out a better solution, great, go with that. Sometimes working with clay is really more about following your instinct. Great to have tutorials. It's great to have demos given to you when it comes to specific things, but it's not always the answer, okay? So like I said, I'm just showing you one way of doing something. If you find a better way of attaching a piece of clay in order to build up your hair, give your hair a little more volume, and then style it, you guys can be, you know, like your own hairdressers in this sense. You know, absolutely go that route. Or, you know, test it out and see how it goes. And if you don't like it, then just pull that clay off and start over. Okay, so I'm going to take that little part that I cut, line it up with my hairline, just kind of gently drape that clay down and I'll just let it kind of fall. Okay, it might lift up in some areas and that's fine. All right, again, because the clay is very flexible at this point, it's got a lot of water in it. I can kind of maneuver it around to do with it what I want it, kind of how I want it to lay. Okay, so I'll start by just using my fingers to coax that clay into place. Okay, and I can always go back and trim a little bit of this off if I decide, oh, you know, that kind of encroached too much on her face. I can come back and fix it up a little bit. So, not too worried about that at this point. Okay, so back here and on the sides of the piece, like I said, I'm just kind of gently coaxing, pushing that clay down against the head, trying to get an extra layer of clay to wrap around this part of the sculpture. Okay, at this point, she kind of looks like she's wearing a little sun hat. And if your fingers aren't cutting it and you need something to kind of tap against that clay to better conform it around a certain area, use something else. Use something that you can kind of treat as a clay paddle. So I'm using a spoon just because that's what I have. Something porous might be a little bit better, something that is able to absorb the moisture in the clay as you're tapping it down on top of the wet clay. Like a paint stirrer might be a great tool. If you have a wooden spoon available to you, that's an excellent tool as well. Anything really that you find can be turned into a tool. Okay. So now that I've got that piece of clay mostly conformed to her head, I'm going to go in and give her a little haircut. So again, I'm just using a toothpick. I know I'm going to go back and clean it up later, so it doesn't really matter if that line is a little rough. So this is good practice for when you guys are going to have to all start giving each other haircuts. If we don't get to leave our houses anytime soon. Oh, not too bad. Okay, she's got a chic little bob right now. And then I can also use my toothpick to kind of pull some of that hair away from the face. So I'm going to turn her towards me so I can see a little bit better. Okay, so I've got that one side kind of swooping over. I'm going to take a little bit more off just so that eye is a little more visible. Okay. All right, so I'm not quite done with that hair just yet. I'm going to take some little coil clay and I'm going to attach them down and around here. Because if you see in my sketch, you'll see that that hair kind of comes out a little bit more away from the face on either side. So I want to just build that hair out a little bit further, but I also want it to be solid. I don't want just a thin little slab hanging down off of the face, because first of all, that'll look kind of funny because it'll just be a slab of hair. And secondly, I want to make this piece as strong as possible. Okay, so if I'm just letting like these skinny little slabs or skinny little coils kind of hanging off the body or sticking straight out, those are going to be targets for getting broken eventually. So I want to minimize that as much as possible. So I'm just going to add a thick coil here, and then I'll show you how to kind of smooth it up onto the clay and then down onto the neck so that it looks like it's a full head of hair. Okay, so I've got the hair attached. Again, just that little slab on top and a little coil coming around the bottom. I could always add another coil if I wanted to make that hair a little bit longer. I'm gonna wait on doing anything more to it just yet. The clay is still pretty soft, so if I want to go in and add texture to kind of separate it into more individual strands, or at least give it that appearance, then I'm going to give it a little time to set up, wait until it's maybe soft leather hard. So not completely leather hard, but just enough drying time to give a tool, whatever I choose to kind of rock into it to make that texture. The clay should be just dry enough to give that tool a little resistance. So I'm not just gumming up the surface of the piece, okay? But much happier with hair. My head is much warmer now.